The auction block in Charleston stood like a monument to human cruelty on that sweltering July afternoon in 1851. Sweat trickled down Solomon's back as he stood alongside 20 other men and women, chained and exposed to the calculating stares of potential buyers. 3 months had passed since slave traders had kidnapped him from his small farm in Pennsylvania, where he had lived as a free man for all of his 32 years. The journey south had been a descent into hell. The cramped quarters of the slave ship, the beatings, the inadequate food and water. But nothing had prepared him for the horror of being displayed like livestock. "Next up," called the auctioneer, a portly man with a voice that carried across the square. "Got ourselves a strong buck here. Claims to be a free man from up north." Laughter rippled through the crowd. "Don't they all? Calls himself Solomon. Good with tools, or so they tell me. Starting bid at 800. Solomon kept his eyes fixed on a point in the distance, refusing to meet the gaze of the men who saw him as property. His muscles tensed against the chains that bound his wrists, the metal cutting into his skin. He had tried to escape twice during the journey south. The scars on his back served as testament to those failed attempts. The crowd seemed uninterested. No one raised a hand. "Come now," the auctioneer continued, his tone growing irritated. "Strong back, good teeth, no visible ailments. 800 is a bargain." Still, no response from the gathered planters and overseers. 700 then. The silence stretched on, uncomfortable now. Solomon could feel the auctioneer's growing frustration. Being unable to sell a slave reflected poorly on his abilities. "I heard he's trouble," called a voice from the back. "Tried to run twice already. Got ideas about freedom in his head." The auctioneer scowled. 600, he said, desperation creeping into his voice, "and I'll throw in the chains he's wearing." A few chuckles, but no bids. Then a man stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. He was tall and lean, dressed in an immaculate white suit that contrasted sharply with his tanned skin. His eyes, pale blue and cold, assessed Solomon with clinical detachment. "I'll take him," the man said, his voice soft but carrying a tone of authority that silenced the murmurs. "But not at 600. The auctioneer brightened. "What's your offer, Mr. Caldwell?" 300. The auctioneer's face fell. "Sir, with respect, that's less than half." 300. Caldwell repeated, "and I'll take the woman there as well." He pointed to an elderly woman who stood at the end of the line, her thin frame bent with age and hardship. The auctioneer looked confused. "Margaret, she's past working age, sir. Not worth much, except maybe as a house servant." 300 for both, Caldwell said, his tone making it clear the offer was non-negotiable. "Or I walk away, and you explain to your employer why you couldn't move the merchandise." Solomon felt bile rise in his throat at being referred to as merchandise, but he kept his expression neutral. The elderly woman, Margaret, had not spoken a word since being brought to the auction block, but Solomon had noticed her watching everything with intelligent, assessing eyes. After a moment of visible internal struggle, the auctioneer nodded. "Sold to Mr. Elijah Caldwell for 300. As Solomon was led off the block, the chains around his ankles clanking with each step, he risked a glance at his new owner. Caldwell was already turning away, speaking quietly to a well-dressed black man who stood slightly behind him. The man nodded at whatever instruction Caldwell gave him, then approached Solomon and Margaret. "My name is William," he said in a low voice. "I manage Mr. Caldwell's house staff. Follow me and don't make trouble." "I am a free man," Solomon said, the words coming out before he could stop them. "I have papers." William's expression remained impassive, but he leaned in closer. "Save it," he whispered. "Not here. Just follow." The journey to the Caldwell plantation took nearly 3 hours by wagon. Solomon and Margaret sat in the back, still chained, while William drove. They passed through Charleston's busy streets, then into the countryside where vast cotton fields stretched to the horizon, dotted with the bent figures of enslaved workers. The July sun beat down mercilessly, and with each mile Solomon felt the distance between himself and his home, his freedom growing insurmountable. "You really were free, weren't you?" Margaret spoke for the first time, her voice surprisingly strong despite her frail appearance. Solomon nodded, not trusting himself to speak. "I can tell," she continued, "the way you hold yourself, the way you look them in the eye." She glanced toward William's back. "Be careful with that. It'll get you killed here." "I won't live as a slave," Solomon said, keeping his voice low. "I'll escape, find my way north." Margaret's laugh was hollow. "Many have tried. Few succeed." She looked out at the passing landscape, especially from Caldwell's place. "What do you know about him?" Solomon asked. Margaret's eyes darted to William before she answered. "Only rumors. They say he's different from other masters. Not in a good way." She leaned closer. "They say slaves who cause trouble don't get sold off his property. They just disappear." Solomon felt a chill despite the heat. "But," Margaret continued, her voice dropping even lower, "they also say there's something strange about his land. That if you know the way." She fell silent as William glanced back at them. When the wagon finally turned onto a long, tree-lined drive, Solomon got his first look at what would become his prison. Caldwell Plantation was smaller than many they had passed, but the main house was an imposing structure of white columns and wide verandas. Unlike the other plantations, there were no slave quarters visible from the approach, an oddity that Solomon noted immediately. As the wagon stopped before the house, Caldwell emerged onto the veranda, still wearing his pristine white suit despite the dust of travel. He descended the steps with deliberate grace and approached the wagon. "William, take Margaret to the kitchen house. Have Esther show her the duties." His cold blue eyes turned to Solomon. "This one comes with me." William nodded and helped Margaret down from the wagon. As they walked toward a building behind the main house, Solomon was left alone with Caldwell. "You have two options, Solomon," Caldwell said, speaking his name with a strange emphasis. "You can accept your position here and work as directed, or you can resist and suffer the consequences. Either way, you will never leave this property." "I am a free man," Solomon insisted, though the words felt hollow in the face of his circumstances. "I was kidnapped. I have a wife, children." "Had," Caldwell corrected, his thin lips curving in what might have been a smile. "You had those things. Now you have only what I choose to give you." He gestured toward the main house. "Come, I'll show you where you'll be working." With the chains still binding his ankles, Solomon had no choice but to follow Caldwell up the steps and into the house. The interior was cool and dim after the bright sunlight, furnished with expensive pieces that spoke of old money and refined taste. They passed through an entrance hall and a formal dining room before reaching a door that led to a narrow staircase. "Down," Caldwell instructed. The basement was unexpectedly vast, extending beyond what seemed possible given the size of the house above. Lanterns hung from hooks in the ceiling, casting pools of yellow light that did little to dispel the shadows. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, a chemical odor that Solomon couldn't identify. Against one wall stood workbenches equipped with tools of various kinds, carpentry tools that Solomon recognized, as well as others that looked medical or scientific in nature. In the center of the room was a large table covered with a cloth. "I understand you're skilled with your hands," Caldwell said, moving to one of the workbenches. "I have need of such skills." "What is this place?" Solomon asked, unable to keep the unease from his voice. Caldwell pulled back the cloth covering the table, revealing what appeared to be a complex mechanical device, partially disassembled. "This is where I conduct my work," he said. "Work that requires precision, discretion, and obedience from those who assist me." "What kind of work?" "The kind that will change the South," Caldwell replied enigmatically. "The kind that requires special materials." He pointed to shelves along another wall, lined with jars containing what looked like preserved specimens. Plant matter, perhaps, though some appeared to be of animal origin. "I don't understand," Solomon said, though a growing sense of dread suggested he didn't want to. "You will." Caldwell moved closer, studying Solomon with those cold blue eyes. "You were not purchased by accident, Solomon. I've been watching the auction blocks for months, waiting for someone with your particular qualities." "What qualities?" "Intelligence, determination, the will to be free." Caldwell's smile widened, revealing teeth that seemed too white, too perfect. "Those are rare commodities, and valuable to me in ways you cannot yet comprehend." A door opened at the far end of the basement, and a young black woman entered. She wore a simple dress of blue cotton, and her hair was covered with a white scarf. She moved with purpose, seemingly unafraid of Caldwell. "Ah, Sarah," Caldwell said. "Right on time. This is Solomon, our newest acquisition. He'll be working with you." Sarah's dark eyes met Solomon's, and he saw in them a mixture of pity and warning. "Yes, Master Caldwell," she said, her voice devoid of the subservience he had come to expect from enslaved people addressing their owners. "Show him to the quarters and explain the rules," Caldwell instructed. "Make sure he understands the consequences of disobedience." "Yes, Master Caldwell." As Sarah led Solomon back up the stairs and out of the house, he tried to process what he had seen: the basement laboratory, Caldwell's strange manner, the absence of visible slave quarters, none of it fit with what he knew of southern plantations. "Where are we going?" he asked once they were outside. "To where we sleep," Sarah replied, leading him toward a grove of trees that bordered the manicured lawn. "It's not far." They walked in silence for several minutes, following a path that wound through the trees. The underbrush grew thicker as they progressed, and the sounds of the plantation faded, replaced by the chirping of birds and the rustle of leaves. "I was free," Solomon said suddenly, needing someone, anyone, to acknowledge this truth. "I have a family in Pennsylvania. I was taken against my will." Sarah stopped and turned to face him, her expression somber. "We all have stories, Solomon. But here, those stories don't matter. All that matters is survival. I won't accept this. I'll find a way to escape." A flicker of something, fear, respect, crossed Sarah's face. "Many have tried," she said, echoing Margaret's earlier words. "Those who failed." She shook her head. "You don't want to know what happened to them. And those who succeeded?" Sarah didn't answer immediately. Instead, she resumed walking, leading him deeper into the woods. Just as Solomon was beginning to wonder if they would ever reach their destination, the trees thinned, revealing a clearing. In it stood not the typical slave cabins he had expected, but a collection of small, neatly maintained cottages arranged in a semicircle. "This is where we live," Sarah said. 12 houses, 48 people. Your house is there." She pointed to the smallest cottage at the end of the arc. "This isn't normal," Solomon said, taking in the unexpected sight. "Slave quarters aren't like this." "Nothing about Caldwell Plantation is normal," Sarah replied, "and we aren't just slaves. We're his experiments." Before Solomon could ask what she meant, a bell rang somewhere in the distance, 3 sharp peals that cut through the afternoon quiet. "That's the work bell," Sarah explained. "You'll start tomorrow. For now, go to your house and stay there until morning. Don't come out no matter what you hear." What might I hear? Sarah's eyes darkened. Pray you don't find out. She turned to leave, then stopped. One more thing. The chains. She gestured to the irons still binding Solomon's ankles. They stay on for a month. If you behave, they come off. If not. She didn't finish the thought. As Sarah walked away, Solomon stood alone in the strange village, the weight of the chains a constant reminder of his captivity. But it was her parting words that truly chilled him. Welcome to Caldwell's domain, Solomon. You're part of the experiment now. That night, as he lay on the narrow cot in his assigned cottage, Solomon tried to make sense of his situation. The house, while simple, was clean and in good repair, far better accommodations than he knew most enslaved people endured. There was a small table with a basin of water, a chair, and even a shelf with several books, an oddity that struck him as particularly out of place. Literacy among enslaved people was forbidden by law in most southern states. Outside, the night was alive with the sounds of the southern summer, cicadas, frogs, the occasional hoot of an owl. But beneath those familiar noises, Solomon thought he could hear something else. Voices, too distant to make out the words, and occasionally what sounded like machinery. He was just drifting into an uneasy sleep when a scream cut through the night, high, thin, and abruptly silenced. Solomon sat bolt upright, his heart racing. He moved to the window, but the clearing outside was empty, bathed in moonlight. The other cottages were dark, their occupants either asleep or, like him, listening in terrified silence. Remember Sarah's warning. Don't come out no matter what you hear. Solomon forced himself back to the cot. But sleep did not return that night, and as the first light of dawn crept through the window, he wondered what kind of hell he had been brought to, and whether he would ever find a way to escape it. For 3 weeks, Solomon worked from sunrise to sunset in Caldwell's basement laboratory, his movements restricted by the chains that bound his ankles. Each day brought new tasks, each more bewildering than the last. He cleaned and maintained strange apparatus, catalogued specimens in jars, and transcribed Caldwell's notes, a task that revealed the man's literacy prejudice didn't extend to his own slaves, provided they served his purposes. The notes themselves were largely incomprehensible to Solomon, filled with scientific terminology and coded references. But certain phrases recurred: subject resistance, behavioral modification, and most disturbingly, permanent compliance. BDD, whatever Caldwell was working toward, it involved controlling people in ways that went beyond the physical constraints of traditional slavery. Sarah worked alongside him most days, her deft hands assembling and adjusting mechanical components according to Caldwell's exacting specifications. She spoke little during work hours, but Solomon gradually learned more about the plantation and its unusual master. He was a physician before inheriting this place, she told him one afternoon, as they cleaned instruments in a corner of the laboratory, her voice barely above a whisper. Studied in Europe for years, came back with ideas that frightened even his own family. Ideas about what? Solomon asked, keeping his eyes on his work as Caldwell paced on the far side of the room, engrossed in a leather-bound journal. About the human mind, about how to change it. Sarah's hands stilled momentarily. He believes he can create the perfect slave, one who never thinks of escape or rebellion, who obeys without question, yet retains the intelligence needed for skilled work. The implication sent a chill through Solomon. How? Sarah glanced toward Caldwell, ensuring he wasn't listening. Chemicals, surgery sometimes, and that machine you've been helping build. She nodded toward the device on the central table, now nearly complete. It resembled a chair with restraints, connected to a series of tubes and containers. What does it do? I don't know exactly. No one who's been put in it can or will explain afterward. Sarah's voice dropped even lower. But they change. Their eyes, they're different. Empty somehow. Solomon thought of the scream he had heard that first night and on several nights since. The ones who resist, they disappear. Sarah nodded almost imperceptibly, or become test subjects for his more experimental procedures. And no one tries to stop him? What about the other plantation owners? Surely they must know something's not right here. A bitter smile crossed Sarah's face. They know. Some even send him slaves they can't control. They don't care what he does, as long as it doesn't affect their own property values. She leaned closer. But there are those who resist in other ways. The ones who've learned to pretend compliance while maintaining their true selves hidden inside. Before Solomon could ask what she meant, Caldwell's voice cut through their whispered conversation. That's enough idle chatter. Solomon, come here. Solomon approached the central table where Caldwell stood, forcing himself to meet the man's cold gaze. Your work has been satisfactory, Caldwell said, his tone clinical. More than satisfactory, in fact. You have a natural aptitude for mechanical tasks. Thank you, sir, Solomon replied, the words bitter in his mouth. The chains have become an impediment to your efficiency. Caldwell reached into his pocket and produced a key. I believe they can be removed now. You've demonstrated sufficient adaptation to your circumstances. Solomon stood perfectly still as Caldwell unlocked the iron shackles. As they fell away, he felt a momentary surge of hope. Without the chains, escape might become possible. But as if reading his thoughts, Caldwell added, Don't mistake this for freedom, Solomon. My property is secured by more than physical barriers. The woods surrounding the plantation are patrolled day and night, and those who attempt escape face consequences far worse than chains. I understand, sir, Solomon said, keeping his tone neutral. Good. Now, I have a new task for you. Caldwell gestured to the chair-like device. The apparatus needs final calibration. You will assist Sarah in preparing it for use tomorrow morning. After Caldwell departed for the evening, leaving them to complete the work under William's supervision, Sarah explained more about the apparatus as they made the final adjustments. It administers a combination of compounds Caldwell has developed, she whispered, through the tubes there directly into the bloodstream. The restraints aren't just to hold the subject in place, they also contain mechanisms that apply pressure to specific points on the body, affecting the flow of blood and, according to Caldwell's theories, the paths of the nerves. Who will be the subject tomorrow? Solomon asked, dreading the answer. Sarah's eyes met his, full of grim certainty. New arrivals are always tested first. That night, unable to sleep, Solomon paced the confines of his small cottage. With the chains removed, he could move freely, but Sarah's warning about the patrolled woods made him hesitate. He needed more information, more time to understand the layout of the plantation and its security. A soft knock at his door startled him. Opening it cautiously, he found Margaret, the elderly woman who had been purchased with him. "May I come in?" she asked, glancing nervously over her shoulder. Solomon stepped aside, allowing her to enter. "It's dangerous for you to be out after curfew. Some risks are necessary." Margaret settled herself on the chair by the table. "Sarah told me your chains were removed today." "Yes. Then it's time you learn more about this place and about the resistance." Solomon felt a spark of hope, the first since his capture. "There's an organized resistance here." Margaret's wrinkled face creased in a smile that held no humor. "Not in the way you're thinking. We can't fight Caldwell directly. He's too powerful, too protected by the laws and customs of this cursed land. But we've found other ways to maintain our humanity in the face of his experiments." She reached into a pocket hidden in the folds of her skirt and withdrew a small cloth packet. Unwrapping it carefully, she revealed a mixture of dried herbs and what appeared to be crushed minerals. "This is our protection," she said, "created by those who came before us, refined over years of trial and error. It doesn't prevent Caldwell's chemicals from affecting the body, but it shields the mind, allows us to pretend compliance while keeping our true selves intact." Solomon stared at the mixture skeptically. How can herbs protect against whatever he's doing? Not just herbs. Knowledge, passed down from the first slaves brought to this land, combined with wisdom gleaned from Caldwell's own books and notes. Margaret rewrapped the packet and pressed it into Solomon's hand. "Take a small amount each morning mixed with water, and before he puts you in that machine of his, take twice as much. You're certain it works?" "I've been on this plantation for 15 years, Solomon. Caldwell thinks I'm one of his success stories, a troublemaker transformed into a docile servant. Yet here I am, my mind still my own." She rose from the chair with surprising grace for one her age. "We cannot escape the physical reality of our enslavement, not yet, but we can prevent him from stealing our souls." After Margaret left, Solomon sat for a long time, turning the small packet over in his hands, weighing hope against skepticism. Finally, he decided that even if the mixture was nothing but superstition, the act of resistance it represented was worth embracing. The next morning dawned grey and humid, a summer storm brewing on the horizon. As Solomon prepared for the day, he mixed a small portion of Margaret's herbs with water and drank it, tasting bitterness and something metallic beneath. Whether placebo or genuine protection, it gave him a sense of control he had not felt since his capture. In the basement laboratory, Caldwell was already present when Solomon arrived, dressed in a surgical apron over his customary white suit. Sarah worked silently at one of the benches, her face a mask of forced calm. The apparatus, the chair with its restraints and tubes, stood ready in the center of the room. "Ah, Solomon!" Caldwell greeted him with unsettling enthusiasm. "Just in time. We're about to begin the demonstration." The door at the far end of the laboratory opened, and William entered, leading a man Solomon hadn't seen before, a newcomer presumably, based on the chains that bound his wrists and ankles, and the fresh welts visible on his exposed skin where he had been beaten. "This is Daniel," Caldwell announced, as William forced the man toward the chair. "Recently acquired from a plantation near Savannah, his former owner found him unmanageable." Daniel's eyes darted around the room, wide with fear. When they settled on the chair, he began to struggle against William's grip. "No!" he gasped. "Please, no." "Restrain him," Caldwell ordered. William and another overseer Solomon hadn't noticed before seized Daniel's arms, forcing him into the chair despite his desperate resistance. The restraints were secured around his wrists, ankles, chest, and forehead, immobilizing him completely. "Observe carefully, Solomon," Caldwell said, moving to a control panel connected to the apparatus. "This is the culmination of years of research and refinement." Solomon watched in horror as Caldwell activated the machine. A series of mechanical clicks and hums filled the room, and the tubes connected to the chair began to fill with a viscous liquid, pale yellow in color. Daniel's struggles intensified as the liquid approached the needles positioned to pierce his skin. "The initial formula induces extreme suggestibility," Caldwell explained, his tone that of a professor delivering a lecture. "The subject becomes receptive to commands, while the pressure points stimulated by the restraints ensure optimal distribution through the nervous system." The first needle pierced Daniel's arm, and his scream echoed off the stone walls of the basement. Solomon flinched, but forced himself to watch, knowing that this might soon be his own fate. "The second stage introduces the conditioning agent," Caldwell continued, adjusting a dial on the control panel. A darker fluid joined the yellow in the tubes. This creates permanent pathways in the brain, associating disobedience with extreme pain and compliance with the absence of pain, a simple but effective form of conditioning. Daniel's screams gave way to whimpers, then to an eerie silence. His body went rigid, then limp, his eyes rolling back in his head. Solomon felt bile rise in his throat, but swallowed it down, aware of Caldwell's assessing gaze, shifting between the machine and his own reaction. "The final stage is the stabilizer," Caldwell said, introducing a third substance into the system. "It ensures that the new neural pathways remain permanent and resistant to deterioration over time." The entire process took less than 30 minutes. When it was complete, Daniel sat motionless in the chair, his eyes open but vacant, his breathing shallow and regular. Caldwell released the restraints and instructed him to stand, which he did without hesitation or sign of distress. "Daniel, what is your purpose?" Caldwell asked. "To serve," Daniel responded, his voice flat and emotionless. "And if you were to disobey?" A flicker of fear, the only emotion Solomon had seen since the procedure began, crossed Daniel's face. Pain, unbearable pain. Caldwell nodded, satisfied. "Take him to the fields," he instructed William. "Start him with basic tasks and observe his performance." As Daniel was led away, walking with the mechanical precision of a clockwork doll, Caldwell turned to Solomon. "Impressive, isn't it? The perfect solution to the problem of slave resistance." Solomon struggled to keep his expression neutral, to hide the rage and revulsion churning inside him. "Yes, sir," he managed. "You wonder if you'll be next," Caldwell said, his pale eyes studying Solomon with clinical interest. "That depends entirely on you. Prove your value in your current state, and you may be permitted to remain. Intellectually intact, resist and—" He gestured toward the now empty chair. "I understand, sir." "I'm not certain you do." Caldwell stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You see, Solomon, I'm offering you a choice that few in your position ever receive. Serve me willingly, assist in my work, and you may retain your mind. Fight me, and you will become like Daniel, a shell of a man, emptied of everything except obedience." The choice was no choice at all, and both men knew it. But Solomon recognized the game Caldwell was playing, offering the illusion of agency to one who had been stripped of all real freedom, perhaps as an experiment in itself. "I will serve, sir," Solomon said, the words acid on his tongue. Caldwell smiled, revealing those two perfect teeth. "Excellent. Sarah will show you your expanded duties." He turned away, already focused on making notes about Daniel's procedure. That evening, as a thunderstorm broke over the plantation, Solomon met with Sarah in secret behind the kitchen house. Rain drummed on the roof above them, providing cover for their whispered conversation. "Did you take the protection Margaret gave you?" Sarah asked without preamble. Solomon nodded, "though I'm not convinced it's anything more than folk medicine and wishful thinking." "It works," Sarah insisted, "but it's not enough by itself. You need to learn to hide your thoughts, to present a face of compliance while keeping your true self hidden." She glanced toward the main house, barely visible through the sheets of rain. "Caldwell is watching you closely. He sees something in you that interests him, something beyond your mechanical skills." "What?" "Your will, your refusal to break despite everything that's happened to you." Sarah's expression was grim. "He wants to study that, to understand it, so he can break it more effectively in others." Solomon absorbed this in silence, understanding the dangerous game he would need to play, appearing to bend without breaking, to comply without surrendering. "There's more you need to know," Sarah continued, "about the woods and what lies beyond them." "The patrols?" "Yes, but also—" She hesitated. "There's a way out, a path through the swamp at the north edge of the property. It's dangerous, quicksand in places, alligators, water moccasins, but the patrols avoid it for those same reasons. Hope flared in Solomon's chest. You're certain? 3 people have escaped that way in the time I've been here. 2 died in the attempt. 1 made it, a woman named Harriet. She left markers along the path for others to follow if they dare. Why are you telling me this now? Sarah's eyes met his, full of a determination that mirrored his own, because Caldwell plans to use you in his next phase of experiments, not as a subject, but as an assistant. He believes you can help him refine the procedure, make it more efficient. The implication horrified Solomon. He wants me to help him destroy other people's minds. Yes, and if you refuse outright, you'll find yourself in that chair. Sarah gripped his arm. You need to appear to cooperate while looking for your moment to escape. It may be weeks, even months, before an opportunity presents itself. Can you do that? Can you pretend to assist in his monstrous work while protecting yourself from becoming a monster? The question cut to the heart of Solomon's fear. Not just that he would never regain his freedom, but that in trying to survive, he might become complicit in Caldwell's evil. Yet what choice did he have? I can, he said finally. I have to. As they parted, Sarah pressed something into his hand, a small, carved wooden disc with markings etched into its surface. For when the time comes, she whispered, the first marker on the path north. That night, lying awake in his cottage as the storm raged outside, Solomon turned the disc over and over in his hands, memorizing the pattern carved into it. It represented a slim hope, a dangerous path that might lead to freedom or death, but it was hope nonetheless, something he had almost forgotten in the nightmare of the past months. Tomorrow, he would begin his performance as Caldwell's willing assistant. He would learn everything he could about the man's methods and madness. He would wait and watch and prepare. And when the moment came, he would run for the northern swamp and the treacherous path that might lead him home. But a voice in the back of his mind whispered a terrible question. After what he had seen today, after what he would be forced to participate in tomorrow and in the days to come, would there be enough of Solomon left to save? Autumn descended on Caldwell Plantation, painting the woods with crimson and gold, while bringing a welcome respite from the summer heat. For Solomon, the changing season marked 2 months of careful deception, 2 months of assisting Caldwell in his horrific work while struggling to preserve his own humanity. The routine had become sickeningly familiar. 3 times each week, a subject would be brought to the basement laboratory, sometimes a new acquisition, sometimes an existing slave who had shown signs of resistance. Solomon would help prepare the apparatus, adjusting the mechanical components according to Caldwell's specifications, which varied based on the subject's physical characteristics and the degree of conditioning required. During the procedures, Solomon maintained a facade of clinical detachment, asking relevant questions about the process, even suggesting minor improvements to the apparatus, anything to convince Caldwell of his cooperation. Each evening, he returned to his cottage and vomited until his stomach was empty, desperate to purge the evil he had witnessed, knowing that physical purging could never cleanse his conscience. Margaret's herbal mixture remained his daily ritual. Though he still couldn't be certain of its efficacy, what he could be certain of was the growing trust Caldwell placed in him. Trust that manifested in increased access to the laboratory, to Caldwell's notes, even to limited areas of the main house when technical assistance was required. On a crisp October morning, as Solomon worked in the laboratory, organizing a shipment of chemicals that had arrived from Charleston, Caldwell entered with an air of barely contained excitement. "Solomon, I have exceptional news," he announced, placing a leather-bound journal on the central table. "My research has been recognized by the Medical Society of South Carolina. They've invited me to present my findings at their annual symposium next month. Solomon looked up from his work, careful to display appropriate enthusiasm. Congratulations, sir. That's a significant honor. Indeed it is. Caldwell paced the length of the laboratory, his customary composure giving way to animated gestures. The implications are far-reaching. With the Society's endorsement, plantation owners throughout the South could implement my methods. Slave resistance could be eliminated entirely within a generation. The thought sent a chill through Solomon's body, not just individual minds being broken, but an entire system of scientific torture spreading across the South, turning millions of enslaved people into empty shells like Daniel. The presentation must be flawless. Caldwell continued, I'll need to demonstrate the procedure for the Society's members, which means transporting the apparatus to Charleston. He turned to Solomon. You will accompany me to assist with the technical aspects. The symposium lasts 3 days, beginning November 15th. Solomon's heart raced. Charleston, away from the plantation. If ever there was an opportunity to escape, this would be it. I'm honored by your trust, sir, he said, hoping the tremor in his voice would be interpreted as gratitude rather than suppressed excitement. Caldwell nodded, apparently satisfied. Your technical aptitude has proven invaluable. I've come to rely on your assistance more than I anticipated. A smile spread across his face. Not the cold, clinical expression Solomon was accustomed to, but something almost paternal. You've adapted remarkably well, Solomon. Perhaps the most successful case of voluntary compliance I've encountered. Thank you, sir. I've come to appreciate the scientific significance of your work. The lie burned in Solomon's throat like acid. Excellent. We leave in 3 weeks. Make the necessary preparations for transporting the apparatus. After Caldwell departed, Solomon sat on a laboratory stool, his hands trembling with a mixture of hope and terror. Charleston represented his best chance for escape since his capture, but also the greatest risk. If he attempted to flee and failed, there would be no mercy, no second chance. Caldwell would not hesitate to use his own creation on the man who betrayed his trust. That evening, Solomon sought out Sarah, finding her in the garden behind the kitchen house where she was gathering herbs in the fading light. Caldwell is taking me to Charleston, he whispered, helping her collect the fragrant leaves of rosemary and thyme. For a medical presentation in November. Sarah's hands stilled momentarily before resuming their work. This is the opportunity we've been waiting for, she said, her voice barely audible. But you'll need help. Contacts in the city. Do such contacts exist? Sarah nodded, almost imperceptibly. There's a network, people who help those like us find their way north. She plucked a sprig of lavender, adding it to her basket. I'll arrange a meeting with Margaret. She knows more than I do about the Charleston connection. 2 days later, Solomon found himself in Margaret's cottage under the pretense of repairing a broken chair. The elderly woman had established herself as a skilled seamstress since arriving at Caldwell Plantation, earning privileges that included a private dwelling slightly apart from the other slave quarters. Charleston, Margaret said, after Solomon explained the situation. Yes, this could work in your favor, but it's also extremely dangerous. Caldwell will be watching you closely, and the city has its own slave patrols, more organized and numerous than those in the countryside. What do I need to know? Solomon asked. Margaret reached beneath her mattress and withdrew a small folded paper, yellowed with age. Carefully opening it, she revealed a crude map of Charleston streets. The waterfront is your best chance, she said, tracing a path with her finger. Here on East Bay Street is a chandlery owned by a Quaker named Elliot Fisher. If you can reach it, ask for work. Use the phrase, "I heard you need strong backs from upriver." He'll understand and help you connect with the Underground Railroad. Solomon committed the location to memory, knowing that carrying the map would be too risky. "How did you come by this information?" A shadow crossed Margaret's face. "My son," she said quietly. "He escaped through Charleston 5 years ago. Made it all the way to Canada." Pride and sorrow mingled in her voice. "He sent word through the network. I never thought I'd have the chance to follow the same path." Solomon understood the unspoken message. Margaret was too old, too closely watched to attempt escape herself. He was carrying her hopes as well as his own. "If I succeed," he promised, "I'll find a way to send help back. For you, for Sarah, for all of you." Margaret shook her head. "Don't make promises you may not be able to keep, Solomon. Just save yourself. That will be victory enough against Caldwell and his kind." As the day of departure approached, Solomon worked meticulously to prepare the apparatus for transport, disassembling it into components that could be packed in crates and loaded onto a wagon. Throughout the process, he surreptitiously studied each piece, understanding not just its function, but how it could be sabotaged if necessary. Caldwell supervised the preparations with growing excitement, spending hours refining his presentation for the medical society. His enthusiasm made him less guarded than usual, and he spoke freely to Solomon about his theories and future plans. "The next phase of research will focus on enhancement, not just control," he explained one evening as they worked late in the laboratory. "Imagine slaves with not only perfect obedience, but enhanced strength, endurance, even intelligence for specific tasks, while remaining incapable of turning those enhancements toward escape or rebellion. How would such enhancements be achieved?" Solomon asked, maintaining his facade of scientific interest. "Selective breeding has shown promise, but it's too slow, too dependent on chance." Caldwell opened a cabinet that was usually kept locked and removed a small vial of dark liquid. "Chemical augmentation is the key. I've already achieved preliminary results with this compound." Solomon recognized the vial from his inventory work, an experimental formula Caldwell had been refining for months, derived from plant extracts and chemical agents imported from Europe. "The effects are remarkable," Caldwell continued. "A 20% increase in physical strength, heightened sensory perception, accelerated healing of injuries. The only drawback is the duration. Currently, the enhancement lasts only 48 hours before requiring another dose." "And the long-term effects on the subject?" Solomon asked, genuinely curious despite his revulsion. Caldwell's expression darkened. "Varied. Some subjects show no adverse effects. Others experience an deterioration after repeated doses. But that's the nature of scientific progress, isn't it? Failures illuminate the path to success." On the morning of November 14th, Solomon awoke before dawn, knowing that this day would determine the course of his future. The journey to Charleston would begin at first light, with Caldwell, Solomon, and 2 overseers traveling by wagon. The apparatus, carefully packed in crates, had been loaded the previous evening. As he prepared for departure, Solomon took a double dose of Margaret's herbal mixture, hoping its purported protective effects would strengthen his resolve for what lay ahead. He had hidden the wooden disc Sarah had given him, the marker for the escape path, in the sole of his boot, a talisman of hope he could not bear to leave behind. The wagon departed as the first rays of sunlight pierced the autumn mist, casting long shadows across the fields where enslaved workers were already beginning their day's labor. Solomon sat beside the driver, an overseer named Thomas, who rarely spoke, while Caldwell rode his horse alongside the wagon, occasionally falling back or riding ahead to survey the road. The journey to Charleston would take most of the day, following the Ashley River Road through small settlements and plantations. For Solomon, each mile that carried him away from Caldwell Plantation was a small victory, a step closer to potential freedom. Yet the proximity to Caldwell and the armed overseers was a constant reminder of the danger that accompanied that hope. They stopped at midday to rest the horses and eat a simple meal of bread, cheese, and dried meat. As they sat in the shade of a large oak tree, Caldwell engaged Solomon in conversation, his manner uncharacteristically relaxed. "Have you ever been to Charleston, Solomon?" he asked. "No, sir. I've heard it's a beautiful city." "Indeed it is. The Paris of the South, some call it." Caldwell gazed toward the distant horizon where, though not yet visible, Charleston awaited. "You'll find it quite different from Philadelphia, I imagine." The reference to his home sent a jolt through Solomon. "You know where I'm from, sir?" Caldwell smiled that unsettling smile. "Of course. I've known since before you arrived at my plantation. Your history as a free man is what made you particularly valuable for my research." Solomon fought to keep his expression neutral. "I don't understand, sir." "The strongest will to resist comes from those who have known freedom," Caldwell explained, his tone academic. "Slaves born into captivity have no concrete experience of liberty to fuel their defiance, only abstract notions passed down through stories. But a man like you—" His pale eyes studied Solomon with disturbing intensity. "You know exactly what has been taken from you. Your resistance runs deeper, makes your eventual compliance more meaningful from a scientific perspective." The casual cruelty of Caldwell's words, the reduction of Solomon's trauma to a data point in an experiment, threatened to crack his careful facade. He took a slow breath before responding. "And have I provided useful data, sir?" "More than you know." Caldwell's smile widened. "Your progression from desperate resistance to reasoned cooperation represents the ideal outcome of my work. Compliance achieved without the need for chemical intervention. You've proven that proper management techniques can achieve what the apparatus enforces through more direct means." The implication was clear. Caldwell believed he had broken Solomon's will through psychological manipulation rather than chemical coercion. The misconception was Solomon's greatest advantage. They arrived in Charleston as the sun was setting, the city's spires and rooftops silhouetted against the darkening sky. Solomon had never seen so many buildings, so many people. Even Philadelphia had not prepared him for the bustling port city with its mixture of elegant mansions and crowded market streets. Caldwell led them to a handsome townhouse on Meeting Street, owned by a fellow physician who was hosting him during the symposium. The apparatus was carefully unloaded and placed in a secure room that would serve as a temporary laboratory. Solomon was shown to a small chamber in the servants' quarters at the rear of the property, separated from Caldwell for the first time since leaving the plantation. That night, alone in his room, Solomon reviewed what he knew of Charleston's layout based on Margaret's descriptions. East Bay Street and the chandlery owned by Elliot Fisher lay approximately half a mile from his current location, a distance he could cover in minutes if unimpeded. But between him and that destination were slave patrols, curious onlookers, and the constant threat of capture. He would need to wait for the right moment. Rushing to escape on the first night would be foolish, especially with Caldwell's presentation still 2 days away. The doctor would be most distracted during the symposium itself. That would be Solomon's window of opportunity. The next day was consumed with preparations for the demonstration. Solomon reassembled the apparatus under Caldwell's supervision, carefully testing each component to ensure it functioned correctly. The medical society had provided a secure room at their headquarters where the presentation would take place, away from public view. "Tomorrow will mark a new chapter in the management of slave labor," Caldwell said, as they completed the final adjustments. "With the society's endorsement, plantation owners throughout the South will adopt these methods. The economic benefits alone will be staggering: increased productivity, reduced oversight costs, elimination of rebellious elements without the waste of capital punishment. Solomon nodded, his expression appropriately solemn, while his mind screamed in revulsion. A significant achievement, sir. And you, Solomon, will have played a vital role. Caldwell placed a hand on his shoulder, a gesture that took all of Solomon's will not to recoil from. Your technical contributions have refined the apparatus beyond my original design. The society will be informed of your assistance. That evening, Solomon was permitted to accompany William to the market to purchase additional supplies for the demonstration. It was the first time he had been allowed into the city streets, albeit under close supervision. As they navigated the busy thoroughfare, Solomon cautiously noted landmarks, mentally mapping escape routes. East Bay Street, he discovered, lay just beyond the market. He could see the masts of ships moored at the wharves, tantalizingly close, yet impossibly distant, while William walked beside him. The chandlery Margaret had mentioned was visible at the corner, its sign swinging gently in the evening breeze. Fisher and Sons, Ship Chandlers Est, 1822, so close to freedom, yet still chained by circumstances as surely as if the iron shackles still bound his ankles. That night, Solomon made his final preparations. He hid a small knife he had managed to pocket from the laboratory among his sparse belongings. He reviewed the path to the waterfront once more in his mind, and he took the last of Margaret's herbal mixture, a silent prayer for protection accompanying the bitter draught. The morning of the presentation dawned clear and cool. Caldwell was resplendent in a new suit of black broadcloth, his excitement barely contained as he instructed Solomon and the overseers in their duties for the day. "The demonstration will begin at 11 o'clock, he explained. 20 members of the society will be in attendance, including several prominent plantation owners. Solomon, you will remain by the apparatus throughout, ready to make adjustments as needed. Thomas and James will bring the subject at my signal." "The subject, sir?" Solomon asked, though he already knew the answer. "A particularly troublesome specimen from Becker's plantation." Caldwell straightened his cravat in the mirror. 3 escape attempts in 2 months. An ideal candidate to demonstrate the efficacy of the procedure. By 9 o'clock, they had arrived at the Medical Society's headquarters, an imposing Greek revival building, with columns flanking its entrance. The apparatus was already in place in the demonstration room, having been delivered the previous day. Solomon busied himself with final calibrations, his mind racing with calculations of time and distance. Society members began arriving at 10:30, distinguished gentlemen in formal attire who greeted Caldwell with collegial handshakes and expressions of curiosity. They largely ignored Solomon, seeing only another slave performing his assigned task, invisible as a human being. As 11 o'clock approached, Caldwell called the gathering to order. "Gentlemen, I thank you for your attendance today. What you are about to witness represents the culmination of 15 years of research into the neurological and psychological foundations of slave resistance and its permanent elimination through chemical and mechanical means." Solomon stood by the apparatus, his face carefully blank as Caldwell began his presentation, explaining the theories behind his work, the chemical compounds he had developed, and the mechanical precision of the apparatus itself. "The procedure results in what I term permanent compliance," Caldwell continued. "The subject retains all necessary faculties for labor, but loses the neurological capacity for resistance, rebellion, or escape. The state is irreversible and requires no further chemical maintenance after the initial procedure." The society members murmured with interest, several making notes in small leather-bound journals. One elderly gentleman raised his hand. "And the economic impact, Dr. Caldwell? What savings might a plantation owner expect?" "Excellent question, Dr. Harrington. Based on data from my own plantation, labor efficiency increases by 30 to 40%. Oversight costs decrease by 60%, as fewer overseers are required to maintain order. And perhaps most significantly, the capital investment in slave property is protected, as disciplinary measures resulting in permanent injury or death become unnecessary. The murmurs grew more enthusiastic. Solomon felt sick. Now, gentlemen, I believe a practical demonstration will illustrate these principles most effectively. Caldwell nodded to Thomas, who left the room, returning moments later with another overseer, and between them, a young black man whose wrists and ankles were shackled. The man's eyes widened with terror as he saw the apparatus, and he began to struggle against his captors. "No, please, I'll work harder, I swear it." "Restrain him," Caldwell instructed calmly, as if the man's desperate pleas were nothing more than an expected element of the demonstration. As the overseers forced the struggling man toward the apparatus, Solomon knew his moment had come. In the confusion of restraining the resistant subject, all eyes were focused on the center of the room. No one was watching him. With practiced motions that betrayed no haste, Solomon made a final adjustment to the apparatus, disconnecting a critical valve in a way that would not be immediately apparent. Then, as Caldwell turned to retrieve the first chemical compound from a case on the table, Solomon moved silently toward the door at the rear of the room. 1 step, 2, 3. The hinges creaked slightly as he eased the door open, but the sound was lost in the commotion of the struggling subject and the interested murmurs of the society members. And then he was through, closing the door behind him, finding himself in a narrow corridor that led to the servants' entrance at the rear of the building. His heart pounding in his chest, Solomon walked, not ran, which would attract attention, toward the exit, each step carrying him closer to either freedom or catastrophe. Outside, the November sun was bright in a clear blue sky. Solomon forced himself to maintain an unhurried pace as he walked away from the Medical Society building, fighting the urge to run, to cry out with the wild joy of potential liberation. Not yet. Not until he reached the chandlery, found Elliot Fisher, spoke the words that would connect him to the Underground Railroad. He navigated the streets of Charleston with the mental map he had constructed, moving purposefully but not suspiciously, keeping his eyes lowered when he passed white pedestrians, as was expected of a black man in the South. When he heard the shouts behind him, distant at first, then growing louder, he knew that Caldwell had discovered his absence. Now he ran, abandoning caution for speed, darting down side streets and through alleys, using the crowds in the market district for cover. Behind him, the shouts multiplied as slave catchers were alerted, the machinery of oppression mobilizing to recapture a single man who dared to claim his freedom. East Bay Street appeared before him, and beyond it, the harbor with its forest of masts and promise of passage northward. The chandlery stood at the corner, just as Margaret had described it. Solomon burst through its door, startling the grey-haired man behind the counter, who looked up from his ledger with a frown. "I heard you need strong backs from upriver," Solomon gasped, the coded phrase tumbling from his lips as he fought to catch his breath. The man's expression shifted from annoyance to alertness. He glanced past Solomon to the street outside, where shouts could be heard growing closer. "Come," he said simply, moving to lock the shop's front door before leading Solomon through a back room and down a narrow staircase to a cellar stocked with maritime supplies. "They're looking for you specifically?" The man, Fisher, Solomon presumed, asked as he moved aside a large sea chest to reveal a trap door in the floor. "Yes, Dr. Elijah Caldwell. I was his assistant." Fisher's eyes widened slightly. "Caldwell, the one presenting at the Medical Society today?" Solomon nodded, his breath still coming in ragged gasps. "Then there's not a moment to lose. He has powerful friends in this city, Fisher pulled open the trapdoor, revealing a narrow tunnel. "This leads to a warehouse on the wharf. A ship leaves for Philadelphia at dusk. The captain is one of us. He'll hide you until you're at sea." "Thank you," Solomon said, the words inadequate for the gift this stranger was giving him. "Thank those who came before you and made this path," Fisher replied. "Now go, quickly." Solomon descended into the tunnel, the smell of damp earth and salt water filling his nostrils. As the trapdoor closed above him, plunging him into darkness broken only by slivers of light from between the floorboards overhead, he felt a weight lift from his soul, the weight of months of captivity, of forced complicity in Caldwell's evil work. He was not free yet. The tunnel, the warehouse, the ship, the voyage north, all held their own dangers. Caldwell would not give up easily, would use every resource at his disposal to recapture the man who had betrayed him and sabotaged his demonstration before the medical society. But for the first time since the slave traders had torn him from his home, Solomon allowed himself to believe that he might see his family again, might reclaim his name and his life, might bear witness to the horrors he had seen, and help bring an end to the institution that enabled men like Caldwell to commit atrocities in the name of progress. As he crawled through the tunnel toward an uncertain future, Solomon silently renewed the promise he had made to Margaret and Sarah and all those left behind at Caldwell Plantation. He would not forget them. He would find a way to send help back. And someday, God willing, he would see Elijah Caldwell and his monstrous creation destroyed. The path to freedom stretched before him, dark but real as the wooden disc still hidden in his boot, marking the first step of a journey that had seemed impossible just hours before. Solomon moved forward, leaving the darkness behind, crawling toward the light. The ship pitched and rolled beneath Solomon as he lay hidden in its cramped hold, wedged between barrels of salted pork and crates of cotton bound for northern markets. 3 days had passed since his escape from Charleston. 3 days of darkness broken only by brief visits from a sympathetic crewman who brought water and hardtack, along with whispered updates on their progress. "We've cleared the Carolina coast," the sailor had informed him that morning. "Captain says the worst danger is behind us now. Still, best you stay hidden till we're past the Virginia Capes." Solomon had nodded his understanding, grateful for even this uncomfortable sanctuary. The alternative, recapture, return to Caldwell, and the certainty of becoming a subject in the very apparatus he had helped build, was unthinkable. In the darkness of the hold, with only the creaking of the ship's timbers and the distant shouts of sailors for company, Solomon had ample time to reflect on all that had transpired since his kidnapping. The memories of Caldwell Plantation haunted his dreams. Daniel's vacant eyes after the procedure, Sarah's whispered warnings, Margaret's herbal mixture that he still couldn't be certain had protected him. Most haunting of all were his own actions. The months of assisting Caldwell, making technical improvements to the apparatus, watching as human after human was transformed into an obedient shell. Even knowing he had maintained his true self beneath a mask of compliance, even understanding that he had done what was necessary to survive and eventually escape. The weight of complicity pressed heavily on his conscience. On the 4th day of the voyage, the door to the hold opened, admitting a shaft of grey daylight that momentarily blinded Solomon after so many hours in darkness. The captain himself descended the ladder, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a weathered face and the calloused hands of one who had worked his way up from common seaman. "You can come up now," he said without preamble. "We're well into northern waters, no slave catchers here." Solomon followed the captain up to the main deck, squinting against the pale winter sunlight that reflected off the slate-grey waters of the Atlantic. The coastline was visible in the distance, rolling hills covered with bare trees, so different from the low, marshy landscape of South Carolina. "Where are we?" Solomon asked, drawing deep breaths of the cold, clean air. "Approaching Delaware Bay," the captain replied. "We'll reach Philadelphia by tomorrow morning if the wind holds." Philadelphia. The name itself was like a prayer on Solomon's lips. Though his home lay further north in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia represented the end of his journey south, the beginning of his return to freedom and family. "I can't thank you enough for the risk you've taken," Solomon said, turning to the captain. "If Caldwell had discovered I was aboard—" The captain's expression hardened. "I've been carrying passengers on the Underground Railroad for 15 years, Mr. Johnson. The risk is part of the work." He studied Solomon with keen eyes. "Though I admit yours is a unique case. Most runaways haven't spent months as the right hand of someone like Caldwell." Solomon flinched at the implied judgment. "I did what I had to do to survive, to escape." "I'm not questioning that." The captain leaned against the ship's rail, his voice dropping so the nearby sailors couldn't overhear. "But you've seen things, learned things that most haven't. Fisher sent a message ahead with another ship. There are people in Philadelphia who want to speak with you, abolitionists who believe your testimony could be powerful." Testimony? About Caldwell's work, this apparatus he's developed. The captain's face reflected the same disgust Solomon felt whenever he thought of the device. If what Fisher wrote is accurate, Caldwell is developing something that could make the institution of slavery even more entrenched, more difficult to fight. Solomon hadn't considered this aspect of his experience, the potential value of his knowledge to the abolitionist cause. He had been focused solely on survival, on returning to his family, but the captain's words stirred something in him, a sense of responsibility to those left behind. "I'll speak with them," he decided. "Tell them everything I know. But then I must get home to my family. They don't even know if I'm alive or dead." The captain nodded. "Fair enough. When we dock, a man named Roberts will meet you. He'll take you to people who can help with both, your testimony and your journey home." That night, Solomon slept in a proper berth for the first time in months, provided by the captain who insisted he needed rest before facing the challenges that awaited in Philadelphia. As he drifted to sleep, lulled by the rhythmic motion of the ship, Solomon found himself thinking not of his imminent freedom, but of Sarah and Margaret, and all those still trapped at Caldwell Plantation. He had promised to send help back. Now, perhaps, he began to see how that might be possible. The ship docked in Philadelphia just after dawn, sliding into its berth amid the bustling activity of one of America's busiest ports. Standing on deck, Solomon marveled at the scene. Dock workers, sailors, merchants, people of all descriptions moving with purpose and, most strikingly, black men, working alongside whites as free laborers, not as enslaved property. True to the captain's word, a man was waiting at the gangplank as Solomon disembarked, a slight, bookish-looking individual with wire-rimmed spectacles and a serious demeanor. "Mr. Johnson?" he asked quietly, offering his hand. "I'm Edward Roberts. Welcome to Philadelphia." Solomon shook the offered hand, still marveling at this simple act of human recognition after months of being treated as less than human. "Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Come, my carriage is waiting. We have much to discuss, but first you must be hungry for a proper meal." Roberts led him to a modest carriage waiting nearby. As they pulled away from the waterfront, Solomon gazed out at the city with a mixture of wonder and wariness. Though he had visited Philadelphia before his capture, the city now represented both sanctuary and danger. Caldwell's influence might not reach directly into Northern Territory, but the Fugitive Slave Act meant that Solomon, though born free, could still be legally seized and returned south if discovered. They arrived at a handsome brick townhouse in a quiet neighborhood. Roberts ushered Solomon inside, where the warm aroma of fresh bread and coffee greeted them. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair met them in the foyer. "This is my wife, Catherine," Roberts explained. "Our home has sheltered many travelers on the Underground Railroad." "You're safe here, Mr. Johnson," Catherine assured him, taking his threadbare coat. I've prepared breakfast, and afterward, hot water for bathing and clean clothes." The simple kindnesses nearly undid Solomon after months of degradation. He managed to thank her, his voice thick with emotion, before following the couple to a dining room where a simple but abundant meal awaited. As Solomon ate his fill of eggs, toast, and coffee, Roberts explained the situation. "Several prominent abolitionists have gathered to meet you this afternoon. William Still will be among them. He coordinates much of the Underground Railroad's activities in this region. They're particularly interested in your knowledge of Caldwell's work." "I'll tell them everything I can," Solomon promised. "But I need to send word to my family as soon as possible. They're in Harrisburg." "Of course. We've already dispatched a messenger. With luck, your family could join you here within a few days." Roberts hesitated, then added, "Though I should caution you, it may not be safe for you to remain in Pennsylvania long term. Caldwell has connections, influence. Once he discovers where you've fled." The implication hung in the air. Solomon's escape wasn't just a personal affront to Caldwell. It represented a threat to his life's work if Solomon shared what he knew. "Canada, then?" Solomon asked. Having heard many fugitives ultimately sought safety across the border where American laws couldn't reach them. Roberts nodded. "Possibly. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. First, rest and recover your strength. Then we'll take each challenge as it comes." After breakfast, Solomon bathed and changed into the clean clothes provided by the Roberts, simple but well-made garments that restored a measure of dignity he had been denied for months. Looking at his reflection in the mirror, he barely recognized himself. His face was thinner, his eyes haunted by all he had witnessed. But he stood straighter, no longer forcing the posture of subservience that had been his protective disguise at Caldwell Plantation. The meeting with the abolitionists took place in the Roberts parlor that afternoon. 5 men and 2 women gathered to hear Solomon's account. William Still, a free black man whose methodical record-keeping had helped hundreds of fugitives reconnect with family members. Lucretia Mott, a Quaker whose quiet intensity belied her powerful influence in the movement. And several others whose names Solomon would later struggle to recall in the intensity of the moment. For nearly 3 hours, Solomon recounted everything: his kidnapping, his arrival at Caldwell Plantation, the strange basement laboratory, and most crucially, the apparatus and its horrific effects on those subjected to it. "He calls it permanent compliance," Solomon explained, his voice steady despite the disturbing memories. "The subject retains physical capabilities, but loses all will to resist. No desire for freedom, no capacity to disobey orders, just emptiness where a human soul once existed." William Still, who had been taking detailed notes throughout, looked up sharply. "And this procedure is irreversible?" "According to Caldwell, yes. I never witnessed anyone recover their true self after being subjected to the full treatment." Lucretia Mott, her face pale beneath her white cap, spoke for the first time. "And you believe the Medical Society of South Carolina was receptive to his presentation?" "They seemed enthusiastic about the economic implications," Solomon replied bitterly. "Increased productivity, reduced oversight costs. Human suffering doesn't enter their calculations. If this method spreads throughout the South," Still began, the horror of the possibility evident in his voice, "it would transform slavery into something even more insidious," another man finished. "Not just the bondage of bodies, but the systematic destruction of minds." "Which is why we must act quickly," Roberts interjected. "Mr. Johnson's testimony must be published, circulated among abolitionist circles, brought before Congress, if possible." "With respect," Solomon said, the words strange on his tongue after months of forced deference, "my primary concern is my family's safety. Once my account becomes public, Caldwell will know exactly who provided it." Still nodded, understanding immediately. "Your safety and your family's. is paramount. We can arrange secure passage to Canada, establish you with connections in Toronto or Montreal where you can rebuild your life. And what of those still held at Caldwell Plantation? Solomon asked, thinking of Sarah's quiet courage, Margaret's wisdom. I promised them I would send help if I escaped. A heavy silence fell over the room. The reality of their situation, the limits of what even the most dedicated abolitionists could accomplish against the entrenched power of Southern slaveholders, was painfully apparent. We cannot mount a rescue operation deep in South Carolina territory, Still said finally. The risk would be too great, the likelihood of success too small. But, Lucretia Mott added, leaning forward intently, we can ensure that Caldwell's work is exposed for the atrocity it is. If his methods are discredited before they can spread, that itself would be a form of help for those still in his power. Solomon understood the logic, even as his heart rebelled against the thought of leaving Sarah, Margaret, and the others to Caldwell's continued experiments. Then let my testimony serve that purpose, he said. I'll provide every detail, every observation that might help undermine his work. The meeting concluded with practical arrangements. Solomon would dictate his full account to Roberts over the next few days, creating a document that could be published in abolitionist newspapers and circulated among sympathetic legislators. Meanwhile, Still would coordinate with contacts in Harrisburg to bring Solomon's wife and children safely to Philadelphia, and from there to Canada. That night, alone in the guest room provided by the Roberts, Solomon found himself unable to sleep despite his physical exhaustion. His mind was filled with conflicting emotions: relief at his escape, hope for reunion with his family, guilt over those left behind, and a burning anger toward Caldwell and the system that enabled his monstrous work. From the pocket of his borrowed coat, Solomon withdrew the small wooden disc Sarah had given him, the marker for the escape path through the northern swamp, now a talisman representing both his journey and his promise. Running his fingers over the carved symbols, he made a silent vow. This was not the end of his fight against Caldwell. Somehow, someday, he would find a way to fulfill his promise to those still held in bondage. 3 days later, as Solomon completed his written testimony with Robert's assistance, a messenger arrived at the townhouse with news that sent a jolt of both joy and fear through his heart. His wife, Rebecca, and their 3 children had been safely brought to Philadelphia and were waiting at another safe house nearby. The reunion that followed was both joyous and heartbreaking. Rebecca, who had feared him dead after months without word, clung to him as if he might vanish again at any moment. Their children, Mary, aged 12, Samuel, 9, and little Joseph, barely 6, regarded him with a mixture of delight and uncertainty, as if trying to reconcile the father they remembered with the changed man who stood before them. They told me what happened, Rebecca said, when they finally had a moment alone, that you were taken by slave catchers sold in Charleston. Her voice broke. I never stopped believing you would find a way back to us. Solomon held her tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, marveling at the miracle of holding her again, when he had so often feared he never would. I never stopped fighting to return, he whispered. Every day, every moment, you were my reason to survive. She pulled back slightly, studying his face with loving concern. You've changed, Solomon. I can see it in your eyes. I've seen things, Rebecca. Done things to survive that. He couldn't continue, the weight of those months threatening to crush him anew. You don't have to tell me now, she said gently. We have time. We're together again. That's what matters. Solomon nodded, grateful for her understanding, though he knew that eventually he would need to share the full truth with her, not just the clinical account he had provided for the abolitionists, but the personal toll of his time at Caldwell Plantation, the nightmares that he suspected would haunt him for years to come. That evening, The Roberts hosted a small dinner for Solomon's family and several key members of the Philadelphia Abolition Network. As they finalized plans for the journey to Canada, scheduled to begin in 2 days, a commotion at the front door interrupted their discussion. Roberts left to investigate and returned moments later, his face grave. "A messenger from the docks," he announced. "A ship arrived from Charleston this afternoon. Word is that Elijah Caldwell was aboard." The news fell like a physical blow. Solomon instinctively moved closer to Rebecca and the children, as if he could shield them with his body from the threat Caldwell represented. "How could he have traced me here so quickly?" he asked, his voice tight with renewed fear. William Still, who had joined them for dinner, shook his head. "He may not know you're in Philadelphia specifically, but he's a determined man with resources. He would have guessed you'd head north." "We need to move you immediately," Roberts decided. "Tonight, not 2 days from now. I have contacts in New York who can arrange passage to Canada more quickly than we planned." "I'm not running from him," Solomon said, surprising himself with the vehemence in his voice. "Not anymore." Rebecca gripped his arm. "Solomon, think of the children." "I am thinking of them." He covered her hand with his own. "And of Sarah, Margaret, all those still in Caldwell's power. If I keep running, he wins. His work continues unchallenged." "What are you suggesting?" Still asked, studying Solomon with new intensity. Solomon took a deep breath, an idea forming that he had been considering since his escape, but had not dared to fully articulate until now. "My testimony alone won't be enough to stop him. Words on paper can be dismissed, denied, but evidence, physical evidence of his work, that would be harder to ignore." "You want to expose him publicly," Roberts realized. "Here in Philadelphia." Solomon nodded. "He's here without his usual protections, outside his domain. If we can confront him in a public forum, present not just my testimony, but evidence of his experiments." "It would be dangerous," Still warned, "for all involved." "Less dangerous than allowing his methods to spread throughout the South," Solomon countered. "Less dangerous than condemning countless others to the fate I narrowly escaped."